John, it seems like it might be happening again. They're saying there is an emergency polio outbreak in New York City. They apparently found it in waste. And, if you go rooting around in dung in New York City, you're going to find some troubling stuff. How are you, John?
Well, I guess other than the polio outbreak, I guess I'm doing great. It sounds like a movie I've seen before. I want to check. Maybe I have the T-shirt. What do you think?
I mean, it just sounds to me like, okay, maybe there's polio present, but is it really an emergency? I don't know. A lot of people are losing faith in a variety of institutions. We got to be careful what we discuss here on YouTube. You and I are frequently lamenting the fact that it's become basically the First Amendment graveyard. But luckily, our generous viewer sponsors have allowed us to create a venue where everybody can get the information that they want. People are going to be able to join us, John, in just about 30 minutes for the sponsor exclusive segment on subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen, patreon.com/IamJohnCullen, and Subscribestar and Patreon/crowdsourcethetruth. People can also watch the simulcast of this broadcast on the John E. Hoover YouTube channel, and that is a channel that people should subscribe to. Thank you to the 44 people who are watching us on there right now. John, you're getting close to 43,000 subscribers. Congratulations on that. You're also on Rumble. Are you on Odyssey?
I am. It's interesting. Odyssey has this automatic linkage with YouTube where if I put something on YouTube, it automatically goes to Odyssey. But the magical thing is when YouTube decides to take things down, it doesn't necessarily come off of Odyssey. So Odyssey seems to have a little bit more staying power.
And it's interesting. I think it copies it or something, because you're right. There is a lot of the original videos that have been removed from Crowdsource the Truth are also still available on Odyssey. So people should check this platform out. It's interesting to note that the Stupid Mario Brothers are engaged in a campaign, an effort to try to destroy Odyssey. Why aren't they doing that to Rumble?
I don't know if you've ever seen the who the crew is behind the Odyssey and the library technology, and it's a Bitcoin type blockchain,
like a blockchain
technology.
Right?
Yeah,
I've been getting emails about it from Stupid Mario Luigi, because he's talking about
it's
trying to
fascinating from a technology standpoint. I will tell you that the Odyssey library stuff and the gang behind it. It's one of the brightest group of people I've ever seen assembled. I mean, this is one hell of a team these guys have. They are some bright programming people, and it's a very impressive platform. I mean, I've used BitChute, I've used everything. I'm impressed with Odyssey. I really have to say I'm impressed with it.
It works well, and people can get to Crowdsource the Truth on Odyssey as well. We've got simulcasts of the live streams. So, like I said, it's a great place for people to join us for the show and, support these alternative platforms. I just feel like Rumble is just a YouTube waiting to happen. Once they gain enough control and power, they'll start shoving out people who they don't like. But, John, we got a lot to discuss today. Obviously, polio in New York is one of the things we're going to talk about. What are people going to be hearing when we carry on with the sponsor-exclusive segment on subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen, patreon.com/IamJohnCullen, and Subscribestar and Patreon/CrowdsourceTheTruth?
Well, as our patrons have become accustomed to, we sort of had to no longer run video clips on the YouTube portion of the channel because of copyright stuff. So I have about 10 video clips that we're going to run for our patrons. One of which is an interview that Albert Bourla gave with somebody from the media, where he's talking about some of the decision making that was going on behind the scenes at Pfizer. He's the CEO of Pfizer. And so we're going to listen to that interview footage. We're going to take a look at a couple of promotional clips from an interview that I had this week. And if you want to jump to the deck, I'll show the audience a little bit about that interview, and we can talk a little bit about something that's coming up. But you were talking about Kathy Hochul and everything in the thumbnail and what's happening with polio, and she just did an executive order. I guess she saw that Joe Biden did 96 of them, and she figured what's good for the president's got to be good for me, right? So she's been doing these executive orders in New York, and at the same time that she's doing all this stuff about COVID and executive orders, and it's a disaster, and the children, and we better do this and we better do that, what seems to get lost in the argument, or what seems to be taken for granted, so it's like, it's interesting. People who think they know what I'm about to share think everybody knows it. In other words, if you know this, there's a tendency to think, well, then everybody must know this, right? It's obvious, but it's not. So if you zoom out and you look at the pie chart, in New York City, this is how many children died with COVID in New York City. Now, this is all children, not school-age kids. This includes toddlers. So what this means is that less than 35 school-age kids have died in New York City. 35 is 1/1000th of the total 35,000 that died. 1/1000th.
That's unbelievable.
Right. So if we're going to be talking about schools and what have you, let's leave the kids alone. Again, I'm not an epidemiologist and I'm not a pediatrician, but I'm talking about from a statistical standpoint. If more children are dying from childbirth, from birth trauma, than from COVID, then isn't birth trauma the bigger medical emergency? That's a question. I don't know. Again, I said, well, what do you think?
I think it's a little bit crazy that we have all these people just issuing these executive orders on the basis of, oh, it's an emergency. I mean, what defines an emergency? If lots of people were getting polio, how do I say this? I want to put this delicately. When I walk outside of this apartment, and I've lived in this city for 32 years, used to be able to walk around. If I was going to go out with friends to dinner, 10, 11 o'clock at night, I would walk from the Upper East Side back to this apartment at 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning and literally have no fear. I've done it many times. I can leave here in the middle of the day at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I can't spend 30 minutes walking around without getting accosted by somebody. Every day you open the newspaper, somebody got their head chopped off, decapitated. And then some dude got attacked with a machete, people getting pushed on the... That strikes me as an emergency. We have a crime emergency in New York City because you cannot spend one day without hearing about crime. If every day I heard about somebody contracting and dying of polio, and then maybe I would agree that there's an emergency, but what criteria do they use to determine that there is an emergency to grant her the authority to even do this?
You just used the magic C word, which is criteria. What are the criteria? And, we talked about this on last week's show when we were talking about a government that just seems to be skipping over the whole legislative part of government and just mandating things. And so that's what I mean by she seems to have picked up on this and thinks this is the way to get it done. Yet there's an entire legislature, right? The Albany exists almost exclusively for that purpose. If you take away the state Senate and legislature in Albany, what are you left with? SUNY Albany? Yeah. What do you need that for? You don't need that. So zoom out a little bit, because what you just brought up is kind of the key point, which is what are the criteria? And I want to make something really perfectly clear. If in New York City, the story was 340,000 children have died of COVID.
Yeah, that's an emergency.
Then I might say, hey, put your mask on and shut up. because I said so, right? Because 340,000 kids have died so far. But when you find out that the number's 34 in the course of 2.5 years, and that more kids are dying in the delivery room, and more kids are dying from drowning, etc., when you compare it, it doesn't appear to be a medical emergency, in my opinion. Now, I haven't seen anybody who says it is a medical emergency, like Kathy Hochul, use this data to make the point. In other words, if Kathy Hochul came forward and made this declaration with this pie chart and said, I want everybody to see this. You see this number 34? This is horrifying. Right? We can't have 34. We need to put a stop to it, right? So if she called out the data and said, this is a number, and everybody said, okay, I'd be okay with it. I just don't think people are aware of the numbers.
I want to share something with you that if YouTube's going to say anything, they better say it to ABC News. This is from, we caught him right in time. So
yeah.
Back in the day, before people, November 25th, 2019, I think we were having Thanksgiving and people were like, COVID, what? Nobody ever heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, ABC News had this story that said more polio cases have been caused by the vaccine than the wild virus.
Yeah. Well, that's not even a thing. Yeah, that's not even a controversy anymore. The vaccine-induced polio, they found that in the UK. And they said it. No, it's vaccine-induced polio. I did a tweet about it saying, because the next story was that they came out with a new vaccine to deal with vaccine-induced polio.
Oh, man.
And so I put a tweet out on Twitter that says, I hope that the vaccine for vaccine-induced polio doesn't cause vaccine for vaccine-induced polio, because then we're going to need another new vaccine for vaccine-induced polio.
But it always reminds me of this episode where Porky Pig checks into the hotel and there's a mouse. And then Daffy Duck is running the hotel and he calls down for a cat to get rid of the mouse. And then he calls for a dog to get rid of the cat. Then he calls for a lion to get rid of the dog. Then he needs an elephant to get rid of the lion. And then in the end, he settles on having the mouse. So yeah, polio, vaccine-induced. It's also like that movie where Marky Mark is a criminal and somebody's got the caller ID buster. So he uses the caller ID buster. And then that guy has a caller ID buster.
Yes. Well, that's what we're going to need if this next series doesn't work. So again, I can't say I know a whole lot about that. I'm grateful that I never got polio. And the fact that it's running around in the sewer system of New York, I mean, that doesn't surprise me given the rats and the garbage and the bags of garbage. Well, that's the other thing.
I mean, they're like, it's
a hellhole.
We found a virus in the sewer. It's like, okay, that's probably, I mean, if you're going to look around in the sewer, you're going to find a lot of stuff that's very unhealthy. Why don't we get some of these nose, in whatever those people are doing?
I got a great idea for a show. Can we get, I do a weekly radio show with Dr. Judy. We can do a field trip with Dr. Judy down in the sewer. I guarantee you we'll find bubonic plague. I guarantee it. If we run it through a PCR machine at 50 cycles, I guarantee you we're going to find bubonic plague in the New York City sewer system.
No, we're not going.
Especially now with all the rats. Let's get Dr. Judy. We'll go down to Brooklyn. I know a guy. We'll go down to Brooklyn. Yeah.
There's a lot to say that you've found a particular disease in the sewer. That doesn't convince me that it's a threat. So why don't they say, hey, you know what? We found polio in the sewer. So what we're going to do is we're going to double the number of New York City sanitation workers. Take some of those 87,000 IRS people and double the size. I think if you doubled the size of the New York City sanitation department and doubled the frequency of trash collection, who would complain about that? That would seem like a good use of resources in New York City.
I think the people in New York City would be stunned if they went to some other places in the country where the sanitation department has these trucks that pick up the garbage cans. I don't know if you've seen these, if you've traveled, like when you drove across the country. I mean, you had to see this. There are garbage trucks that have like this robot arm that comes out and picks up
Yeah,
the
I've seen
garbage
that.
can, dumps it in the truck, and then puts the garbage can back down. The people who live in New York who are throwing lawn and leaf bags out on the curb, and the dogs and the rats and everything is going through the garbage up there in New York. I mean, I watch you and Charles walking around, and I'm like,
It's
this
disgusting.
is disgusting. And there's other cities where they've got these robot arms on the garbage truck thing. I think if New Yorkers saw that, they would turn to the sanitation department and go, and we don't have this because we like the black lawn and leaf bag
I mean,
strategy? I mean,
why
what exactly
why
is the
don't they
game
just
plan here?
double it? I mean, there's so much money in this city. Cleaning up garbage, first of all, would make the place look better, reduce injuries. People have got to be tripping on that garbage and getting sick from it, and they're not solving any of the problems. And then they're calling emergencies because you've got polio in the sewer. Wait a minute now. Oh, dirtiest. Yeah, Los Angeles is dirtier than New York. That's surprising. How are they measuring this?
Depends what block you're on. Well, why don't we show the audience a couple slides before we have to go over to the patron only hour, because there's only so much we can share. But there is some exciting new news in the slide deck. So we were looking at the Kathy Hochul pie chart, but earlier in this week I was introduced to Steve Kirsch. And Steve is an entrepreneur. He was the founder of a company called Mouse Systems, which is the company that invented the optical mouse.
Yeah, that was the one I had.
Before there were optical mice, they had a little ball in them. For those of you youngsters who are like, what is there other than an optical mouse? They used to have a ball, and the ball used to collect dirt and lint and stuff. And Steve invented the optical mouse. He's from MIT. But then he founded two big companies. One was InfoSeek. And before Google was Google, Yahoo and Alta Vista and InfoSeek were the big search engines. And he ended up selling InfoSeek to Disney.
Here's a
And
rare vintage mouse system. I think they used to have these on either Sun or Silicon Graphics.
Workstations. Yeah. So this was, his first thing. Then he did FrameMaker, and FrameMaker was a big software publishing and layout type thing. Again, before Adobe was really the big player, and Adobe ended up buying FrameMaker from him. So he's done a whole bunch of these things again and again and again. He was at MIT, and he does a number of podcasts. He's frequently on Brett Weinstein's podcast. So he came and sat down with me, and we ended up talking for about 2 hours.
Wow.
And I've got some promo clips that I'll share with the audience. If you go to the next slide, you'll see him with Brett Weinstein and Dr. Malone in the next shot.
I love the optical mouse. I was very early on the optical mouse.
Awesome. The fact that you can still buy them on eBay is awesome. So he's done the show with Brett Weinstein. That's him with Dr. Malone right there. And he has a Substack, and he writes, and he's very active in all this stuff. And the guy's brilliant. And he sits down with me, and we had some common ground. If you roll forward to slide 02, we'll talk about the 21 U.S. Code 360 BBB, because that was where our reporting, and remember, Heather had been listening, and she tells Brett the next day. And then the day after that, Maria Bartiromo was asking Pierre Corey about it with Senator Johnson. So I tell him this whole story, and he's entertained by it. He thinks this is kind of funny. And the fact that, we're all kind of reporting on the same things, and we're all on the same team. And then I show him some of the dashboards, and I show him some of the pie charts. Let's just roll forward real quick before we have to jump to there's a pie chart that has like 6 pies on it. 6, yeah, there you go. And so I show him this, and, we're looking at all these different states. We're looking at, California, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and how many kids have died with COVID, and looking at the statistics, looking at just the data, the raw numbers. And is a former CEO of big technology companies, this is kind of what you're looking for. You want to cut to the chase, right? What's the net? What's the
Bottom
bottom
line
line,
up
right?
front. Yeah.
That's it. And so that's what I said to him is, I want to share with you the bottom line up front so you understand sort of this other story and the fact that you guys have been coming after sort of adverse events and sort of post-inoculation issues, whereas I've been coming at it from a different perspective, which is it needed at all if these are the numbers? In other words, let me ask the audience a question. So I have a stepson, 12 years old. And the reason that we don't go get his prostate examined is because 12-year-old boys
Don't get prostate cancer, really?
right. And the reason that we don't go for a colonoscopy when he's 12 years old is
They get colon cancer either, really.
so when we look at this data, does the CDC feel that we're just too stupid to comprehend this? And that, because, again, if more children are dying in childbirth and more children are dying from drowning, can't we just use the colonoscopy type logic and say, and children also kind of aren't dying from this thing?
Yeah.
And so, like a colonoscopy, you don't necessarily need that thing. I don't know. I could be wrong, but that's why I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm just a guy who makes pie charts. But when I look at the pie charts, to me, they look like the same reason why we don't do a prostate exam on a 12-year-old.
I think there's a huge opportunity for you to create a charting software application. You could call it Paisan.
Paisan. I like it.
Yeah,
And if you don't understand the pie chart, it starts yelling at you with hand motions in 3D. All right, jump ahead real quick and I'll show you guys what I showed Steve. And this really got his attention. One more slide. Let's go to the mountain slide.
Yes.
All right, so I show him this, and I said, it appears that there were two pandemics at the same time, because when we look at the comorbidity stuff, there's 500,000 people that died with both of these viruses at the same time. And just like I could be infected right now, I potentially could be infected right now with COVID-19 and HPV. I could potentially be infected right now with COVID-19 and zoster virus.
Why don't you go for the polio monkeypox combo? That's hot this
Thanks
season.
Thanks a lot. I haven't been to a gay bath in months, so I think I'm safe. I think I'm safe. But jump ahead one more slide before we jump to our patron only. This is really the money slide. And even when we did the grand jury presentation, this was the slide that really matters, because this is January, February, March of 2020 before COVID arrives. COVID's in green. And what we see here is 4,000 people a week dying of influenza, and it doesn't just go away. And as I showed this to Steve Kirsch, and then we went and looked at all the WHO stuff where it just disappears at week 11 and 14.
Yeah.
He's like, this can't be viral interference. He's like, that's absurd. That, it doesn't just go and disappear.
And of course, he understood that this is information coming from the CDC, the World Health Organization. It's not stuff that you
he's
made
an
up.
MIT guy. Yeah. So and I explained to him why I'm in the getup, why I'm in the disguise, and the whole Al Qaeda connection.
How did he react to that?
He understands. Again, he understands my background because he's another computer industry guy. So he's like, as a computer industry guy, I'm an ex-Oracle guy pulling data from the CDC and charting it, and I don't want people to know who I am, because I've been reporting on Al Qaeda, and the guys I report on, shoot people in the head. So, that's enough of a reason for me. And so as we're reviewing this data, he's getting it. So we're going to look at a couple of these promo clips. You guys will get to see it. Hopefully it'll be ready on Rumble, either later this evening or tomorrow. And you'll get to see Steve Kirsch's reaction to these charts that we've been sharing with you guys for the last 2.5 years here on the show. And it's a lot of fun. It's really an interesting show. I think you guys are going to enjoy it.
It's going to be great. And we're just about out of time here on YouTube. So people have just about 5 minutes to join us over on patreon.com/IamJohnCullen, subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen, and subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Join us over there. There's a ton of sponsor exclusive material. Got some special 9/11 stuff coming tomorrow. John has a load of sponsor exclusive stuff on his Subscribestar and Patreon. So please get onto both of those sites. Join us in just 5 minutes.